finally, we're getting these roundtables coming out from the Chosen, and in this episode, I wanted to talk specifically about the Romans, specifically about Gaius. What are the roles of the Romans, and kind of what's going on with that? In the behind the scenes this week, we actually talked a ton about Gaius and Quintus and Atticus, and how Atticus actually probably saw Jesus out on the water. But what's more interesting to me is actually the historical and contextual context, the historical, cultural, and biblical context of what we see with the Romans overall. And so as we look at this section of the Bible Roundtables, let's kind of talk through that and talk about what the Romans actually are here for. What is their purpose, and how would they think about certain things within the Chosen overall?
All right, episode 2, lots to discuss, including one of the more unique, somewhat bizarre moments in the Gospels, which we'll get to, with Jesus sending people out 2 by 2. We've also got what some people call that scene, the scene with little James that we want to talk about. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that one. That's a big one, got some controversy. But first, the episode opens with a conversation between Gaius and Atticus. Atticus, an invention of ours, but Gaius, as you may be picking up on, becomes a character that we know from Scripture. We just didn't know his name, the Centurion.
So this is the first actual confirmation from Dallas that this is the Centurion. Really, really cool. So we're finally getting like confirmation from Dallas that yes, Gaius, obviously at this point we know, is the Centurion with the sick servant. And so we're going to see that play out in season 4. Really, really cool that we see that.
But you mentioned, Father David, earlier in the day when we were just talking offline about the long game with Gaius, which you've appreciated. The fact that in a lot of Bible projects and Jesus projects, you're seeing miracle to miracle, encounter to encounter. We don't get to know what may have caused someone to get to the place where, in our case with Gaius, where he's obviously the centurion with the servant who needs to be healed, get to the place where he has faith. And so we see his journey. Talk about that a little bit, what you picked up on in that.
And it's not only that he has faith, but actually Jesus says that his faith is unlike anybody else in all of Israel. That's pretty crazy when we think about that. Like Gaius's faith, Jesus literally says, I have never seen any faith like this in all of Israel. So this is a big deal. Because
in this episode, we are seeing his mind is going. His heart is going. He's heard the Sermon on the Mount. Clearly it impacted him. What did you take note of?
Yeah, so often conversion is portrayed as something that happens instantly. Right. And I think with Gaius, it's the long game. You know, he's there, he witnesses, he experiences. It's hard for him to put it in a context that he's familiar with. But it's really beautiful, the relationship he starts to have with Simon Peter. They both kind of honor who each other are, but they have these conversations about important things. And you can see that makes both of them think in new ways, especially Gaius. And I'm really anxious to see how this plays out in coming episodes and seasons.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
Later episodes in this season, we see Simon and Gaius talking at length, and I'll definitely be curious to hear your thoughts on some of that. But in terms of, it made me think of the Roman presence in this story. So we know that the Jewish existence at that time was oppressed, and that it was a constant weight on their shoulders, the weight of Roman oppression. But it's not discussed a whole lot in Scripture, probably because the writers didn't need to tell their readers what the situation was, because their readers knew. But how much would the Romans at that time have cared about Jesus? When do we know much besides when when the Jews took him in for this potential crucifixion? Do we know that, would the Romans have cared much? Would they have cared about potential uprisings here and there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there'd been a lot of Jewish religious leaders who claimed to be the Messiah before Yeshua, before Jesus. And so I think anyone who was drawing the type of crowds he was is going to definitely go on the radar, and he's going to be someone who they're going to be keeping a watchful eye on.
Yeah, they wouldn't have cared about whether he was theologically accurate or not. The arguments that the Jews were having about him, completely irrelevant to them. To them, there's too many people gathering in one place. And they would have been aware also, right, of the Jewish expectation of a Messiah. And to the Romans, that would have been considered a threat, especially because we'll explore this later, but thinking of him as king of the Jews, they would have thought, oh, is this a guy that's going to replace Herod? We like Herod. We're getting along with Herod. We're getting along with Caiaphas, but we don't know this guy, right? And so that
Absolutely.
Atticus is a character that we've invented, but we're using him as the connection between Rome and these small towns and these little uprisings and what.
That is interesting. It's just a weird way that they're using the cohorte urbanae, because like I've said previously, like the cohorte urbanae they don't work like Atticus works, at least not that we understand in history. So it is a made up position and a made up like character. I get the use that they're trying to get from Atticus. But historically, I'm not sure it makes 100% sense. So it's just funny to me. But yeah. Real quick, if you haven't heard yet, we're going to Israel in January of 2024. So we would love to have you on that trip with us. It's one of the cheapest trips you can possibly book, and everything is taken care of except for your lunches during the day. This is going to be awesome, and, well, we really want you to be a part of it. We've got some amazing hosts, Isaac David and John McCrae, and also, we're going to be doing some amazing, amazing things. This is my 4th Israel trip, and so I've been able to curate exactly what it is that you guys want to check out, taking out the things that just waste time, and the things that I think are not essential, and really focusing on what God would want us to see in the Holy Land. I'd love to see you over there, and all the info is in the description down below.
What they might have been observing or nervous about.
Yeah, the Jewish territory in what we call Israel today had several zones with different Roman representative rulers, like Herod Antipas over Galilee and Pilate over Judea. And those leaders were tasked to make sure that the tax money was flowing to Rome and that the people were quiet and not rioting. So anytime there was word about some Messiah, who for many Jews meant a military person who was going to come and fight our military battle right here and save us from Rome. So yeah, they would be very aware of that and sensitive to that. The first century historian Josephus actually comments that there were thousands of these would-be rebels that popped up here and there.
Yeah, we hear a little bit about this in season 3, right? When Shmuel is doing his research, trying to find who this Jesus guy is that's from Nazareth, and has his heritage in Bethlehem and all that stuff. Like, he's trying to find this Jesus guy, and yet he can't, right? He keeps on running into all these other issues with these other false messiahs that are coming and talking about, how they're the Messiah and how they're like raising money for their causes and stuff, right? So we get a little bit of a glimpse of that in season 3 as well.
So keeping tabs on this Jesus guy, and this is hinted at later in later episodes. Yes, several other people might have been named Jesus as well, because that was a common name in the first century.
Well, Yeshua was a common
Yeah.
Joshua, yes. We're fully aware Jesus is a transliteration. So hold back a little bit. We're doing our best. But
I think about that very often as well. Just the name Jesus and how he used that, how the true name would have been Yeshua, closer to like Joshua, right? How we talk about Joshua. So it is interesting, how we came to the name Jesus. I was thinking about that this morning during church as well, but it's always an interesting thing for me to kind of walk through that. Real quick while we're at a break here. Just want to say thank you so much to Mrs. Darcy. Appreciate that so much. Thank you for the $10 donation. You rock. Really, any donations really, really help us out. So I appreciate that a ton. Thank you so much for that.
So we also portray that it wouldn't have just been we're going to kill anyone who we don't like, because the Romans didn't necessarily want a big uprising, and sometimes a killing would have caused one. In fact, as we explore later in the season, we hint at this when Pilate references, I've been reprimanded for my use of force, because there were times when an uprising would start to develop. Someone from Rome would order some mass execution, and that would make things worse. So there wasn't, as much as they were oppressive, it wasn't necessarily true that they're just walking around killing people, because that would have gone against their way too. They wanted peace. They wanted to keep things safe.
They wanted order.
Fair. Yeah, that's probably better said. Yeah.
Well, there was a thing called the Peace of Rome, but
Right.
it was order. Yeah.
Now, before we get into the bulk of the episode, which was this scene at Simon Peter's house where Jesus is talking to the apostles, anything that stood out or anything that you want to raise? Because we've got a couple of things to discuss. It'll take a little more time, like that 2x2 and like the little James scene.
You mentioned Capernaum, a little town on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was actually a border town between two of these Roman regions, and thus taxation for people traveling in and out. Atticus has a line talking about Capernaum as a Roman town. Well, Capernaum wasn't a Roman town, but that's sort of maybe wishful thinking by a guy from Rome who wants everything to be a Roman place. Capernaum was still quite Jewish in its orientation.
So wasn't Roman occupied, actually? I mean,
Roman occupied, but a Roman town meant, Roman temples and having gymnasiums and bathhouses and circuses and So Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea on the sea, Mediterranean Sea, that was a Roman town. That was actually
this is something that we talk a lot about when we go to Israel, because you can see a vast difference between these Jewish towns and the Roman towns for sure. And so as we look at that, we see this huge difference between Caesarea Maritima and a place like Capernaum or a place like Magdala even. These are not Roman cities. These are Jewish cities that have been occupied by Rome. And so certain soldiers and stuff would live there, but there was no temple to Apollo, or a temple to Zeus in these certain locations. It just didn't exist other than in those big Roman cities, for sure.
Actually, the capital city, Beit Shan in southern Galilee, those were true Roman cities. Right. But Atticus is this Rome representative, so when he makes that comment, I hear him kind of wishful thinking. Well, this has got to be a Roman town because all places have to be Roman.
Yeah, when he says to Simon Z, can't have zealots in a Roman town. Yeah. And that's the thing too. The zealots we talked about this a little bit in our season 2 roundtable, but the zealots were this group that did believe that their task was to rid the earth of enemies of their traditional Jewish faith, right?
Yeah, they wanted to rid of the occupying force that they felt was this is the promised land, right? This is the Holy Land. Mm-hmm. Their presence was problematic because they brought Greek gods, right? They brought pagan worship. They brought temples devoted to Caesar.
Yeah, the Zealots were the most extreme of the extreme when it came to Jewish faith. They thought that they needed to eradicate anything that was against what they believed their God would want. And so they were extremists. They were really violent extremists in some cases where it wasn't just a political thing, but like the Sicarii, that was what Simon the Zealot is a part of. The Sicarii were a very specific group of zealots who really they really tried to destroy a lot of people. They actually assassinated people. One of the oldest assassination orders in the world, and so it's an interesting thing to think about there. But yeah,
they brought the circus and the bloodshed and all of these things that was an affront to what the scripture said this land. I mean, they didn't care if they wanted to do that in Rome, that they don't care. But, but in the place where God says his name is going to dwell, and the fact that Rome took judicial authority from the Jewish leadership, these are all problematic things. So they were throw out the occupiers.
Yeah, and the Zealots would have been none too pleased with someone like Simon leaving their order. So that the notion of them chasing him back down would have been realistic, saying you left us, you violated the
They were all or nothing people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were looking for a military messiah to save their country from Roman occupation. And as I recall, there were zealot outposts not too far from Capernaum in historical literature. So yeah.
Yeah, really cool overall. I think understanding the Romans, understanding the Zealots, understanding these different people groups is going to be a huge thing for season 4, for all the other aspects of the Chosen in general. We have to understand who the Pharisees are and the Sadducees are and the Sanhedrin, and then the Roman forces and what these different things do. What is a praetor and what is his role, right? We did a lot of research on this early on in our research of the Chosen, understanding that. How do we navigate this world? Mentally, how do we walk through this and see how these different parts are moving? Well, we have to understand the parts themselves first, right? We have to understand Rome. We have to understand the Pharisees and the religious leaders. We have to understand Jesus and his purpose and his group's purpose. And then just the Jewish people at large. What were they like? What were they going through? What was actually happening here? What were the Gentiles like in the area? All those different things play a piece of this. And so we have to pay attention to those different things, absolutely. If you like this small part of the stream, then you can watch the full entire 2-hour stream on our Patreon at patreon.com/thesnipelife. This is an amazing way that you can help to support us, and really the best way that we've found over the years. So if you want to support us over there, go to patreon.com/thesnipelife and sign up for $5, $10, or $25. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.